In a world where ambition and success often overshadow personal connections, Jack Thompson, a young and powerful billionaire, has built his life on wealth and isolation. But everything changes when he receives a call from a child named Noah, who claims to be his son. This shocking revelation shatters Jack's carefully constructed world, plunging him into an emotional journey that challenges his identity, his past, and his role as a father. With a family secret hanging over him, Jack is forced to face the consequences of his forgotten past and the life he could have had, as he struggles to reconnect with Noah and uncover the truth about Emily, the woman who holds the key to his family's future. Jack Thompson had always believed that control was the key to success. As a young billionaire, he had carefully crafted his life to reflect that principle, every decision calculated, every move deliberate. His empire of luxury hotels and business ventures was built on precision and power. But one afternoon, the call he received shattered that illusion. A young boy named Noah, with a voice full of nervous excitement, claimed to be his son. At first, Jack laughed it off, brushing it aside as some kind of scam or prank. He had no recollection of any such child or relationship. But something in the boy's words lingered, an odd sense of familiarity that gnawed at him. His chest tightened as a feeling of unease slowly replaced his initial disbelief. He dismissed his assistant and immediately booked a flight. His mind raced as he found himself standing at a school gate, looking at a young boy, no older than 6, with wide eyes staring back at him. The resemblance was undeniable. Noah's features were unmistakably his. Jack's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was his son. As Jack crouched down to meet the boy, a flood of emotions overwhelmed him. Questions swirled in his mind. How had this happened? Why had he never known? His thoughts were interrupted by Noah's innocent smile, the small hand that reached out to him with quiet trust. The overwhelming reality of it all hit Jack like a punch to the gut. He realized then that his past with Emily, the woman he had briefly been involved with 6 years ago, was far more complicated than he had ever imagined. In the days that followed, Jack's life began to unravel in ways he hadn't anticipated. He learned that Emily had been struggling with cancer, a battle she had fought alone, hiding it from him. The guilt hit him hard, the weight of knowing that while he had been living in luxury and comfort, she had been silently enduring pain, and Noah had grown up without a father. His mind raced with regret. How had he been so blind to the possibilities? How had he let so much slip through his fingers? Yet, despite the sting of betrayal and grief, Jack knew he couldn't ignore the present. His newfound role as Noah's father forced him to make changes he never imagined. The cold, distant businessman began to soften, starting to see the world through his son's eyes. He spent hours learning about Noah's likes and dislikes, trying to navigate the new territory of parenthood. As Jack took the first steps toward reconnecting with his son, he also learned the hard truth about Emily's health. Her condition was deteriorating rapidly, and she was suffering from memory loss after a medical procedure. The woman who had once held a piece of his heart could no longer remember their shared history, and Jack found himself desperately clinging to the hope that together, they could help her recover the memories she had lost. In the midst of this emotional storm, Jack was forced to confront the darkest corners of his own soul. He had built his empire on the foundation of control, but now, control seemed like the very thing that had kept him from embracing his true self. What started as a shocking discovery turned into a painful, yet necessary, journey of redemption, one that would shape Jack's future in ways he never could have imagined. As Jack Thompson pulled up outside the elementary school, his hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than he realized. For a man used to navigating billion-dollar mergers and facing cutthroat CEOs, it was ironic how a call from a small child had left him breathless. His heart pounded in his chest, louder than the engine humming beneath him. This wasn't a calculated business risk, this was his life turning upside down. And the stakes were infinitely higher. He stepped out of the car, suddenly aware of how out of place he looked in his custom suit and polished shoes. Around him, parents laughed and waved, calling out to their children as they emerged from the school. Jack stood still, scanning the sea of youthful faces until he saw him. There, standing quietly near the gate, was a boy who looked so much like a younger version of Jack that he momentarily forgot to breathe. The boy had Jack's unmistakable jawline, the same deep-set eyes, and even the same curious tilt of the head. He wasn't just any child, he was Jack's child. And Jack knew it before a single word was spoken. "Noah?" Jack's voice cracked slightly as he took a cautious step forward. The boy turned, his gaze wary but open. He clutched the strap of his backpack tightly, the way a child does when they don't know whether to run or stay. "Are you Jack Thompson?" he asked. Jack crouched down to meet his eyes. "Yes," he said softly. "I think. I'm your father." There was a long pause, and Jack's heart seemed to stop. But then Noah nodded slowly, not with certainty, but with quiet acceptance. That simple gesture was enough to break Jack's carefully constructed world into 1,000 pieces. The drive back to the city was surreal. Jack kept glancing into the rearview mirror, watching Noah trace shapes on the fogged window with his finger. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy, with questions, with history, with unspoken fears. Jack's mind raced. How had he not known about Noah? Why had Emily kept this from him? What else had she hidden, and why? A part of him felt angry, betrayed, but another part, the deeper part, was overwhelmed with something else entirely, wonder. Wonder at how life could change in a single moment. Wonder at the small boy who sat behind him, who shared his blood but had lived without him for so long. Noah eventually broke the silence. "Mom says you're a very busy man." Jack's throat tightened. "I was," he replied after a pause. "But I'm not going to be anymore." There was no dramatic proclamation, no tearful reunion, just quiet acknowledgement. Jack reached a hand behind the seat, and Noah, hesitantly, took it. That small connection, that warmth between their fingers, said more than any words could. In that moment, Jack knew his life was no longer his own. It belonged to this boy now, to making up for lost time, to becoming the father he never imagined he'd be. And though fear clung to him like a second skin, so did hope. Hope that this was just the beginning. When Jack first learned that Emily had cancer, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The news didn't come from her directly, he heard it from a nurse at the hospital, almost by accident, during his desperate attempt to track her down after meeting Noah. The name Emily Carter on a patient chart stopped him cold. It felt impossible, unreal. The woman who once laughed so freely in the soft light of summer, whose stubborn strength he had both admired and feared, was now fighting a silent, devastating battle, and he hadn't even known. Racing through the hospital corridors, Jack felt a mixture of fury and fear burning in his chest. Fury that no one told him. That Emily never told him. That his own family might have played a role in hiding this truth. But underneath it all was a rising tide of dread, the kind that stripped away titles and wealth and left only a raw, human ache. What if he was too late? What if all he had now were memories and a child who barely knew him? When he finally stood by Emily's hospital bed, the sight of her shook him. Her once vibrant eyes were tired, dulled by chemotherapy and pain. Her hair, once full and golden, had thinned beneath a soft scarf. But it was her smile, weak, but still real, that shattered him. "Jack," she whispered, as if saying his name cost her strength she no longer had to spare. Jack sank into the chair beside her, his hands trembling as he reached for hers. There was so much he wanted to say. So many apologies, so much blame, and 1,000 questions he was afraid to ask. But in that moment, words felt useless. He simply held her hand and let the silence carry the weight of all the lost years. Emily, too, was wrestling with emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Seeing Jack again stirred up everything she had buried, the heartbreak, the longing, the quiet anger that he hadn't fought harder for them. But there was no time for bitterness now. Cancer had a way of shrinking the world down to its essentials: love, time, and truth. She had kept Noah hidden to protect him. To protect Jack. But now, looking into Jack's tear-filled eyes, she wondered if she had done the right thing, or if fear had cost them all too much. As doctors spoke in low voices about treatment plans and limited options, Jack felt helpless for the first time in his life. Money couldn't fix this. Connections couldn't erase it. The only thing he could do was stay. Be there. Be present for every test, every moment of pain, every flicker of hope. And for the first time, he realized what it truly meant to love someone, with nothing to gain and everything to lose. Jack Thompson had always been a man of structure, ambition, and absolute control. In the world of billion-dollar mergers and fast-moving markets, there was little room for hesitation or vulnerability. But nothing in his meticulously calculated life had prepared him for the moment he looked into the eyes of a small boy named Noah and saw himself staring back. In the days that followed their first meeting, Jack found himself gripped by a sense of responsibility that was both foreign and terrifying. His thoughts became a storm of regrets, questions, and a desperate need to reclaim the years that had slipped away. He couldn't stop replaying the past. Why hadn't Emily told him? Who had made that decision for him? For Noah? But amidst the storm, there was something else, something purer. A seed of hope. The possibility of becoming someone new. Jack threw himself into fatherhood like a man trying to save himself. He rearranged his schedule, canceling international meetings, postponing product launches, and stepping back from daily operations of his empire. His assistants were baffled. Investors were concerned. But Jack didn't care. For the first time, his time wasn't about maximizing wealth, it was about presence. Real, human, painful, beautiful presence. He began with small gestures. Picking Noah up from school. Sitting with him during dinner, even though the silence between them often felt heavy. Reading bedtime stories, stumbling over silly voices that made Noah giggle despite himself. Jack noticed how guarded the boy was at first, how each act of kindness was met with quiet skepticism. But he understood that trust would have to be earned slowly, brick by brick, through consistency. Jack also began caring for Emily. She had always been strong in his memory, fierce, independent, radiant. But now she was fragile. Her illness had hollowed her cheeks, weakened her voice. Still, she met each day with quiet bravery. Jack made it his mission not to just be there, but to shoulder the burden with her. He drove her to treatments. Sat beside her in waiting rooms. Held her hair back during the worst of the nausea. And in those raw, unfiltered moments, something unspoken began to mend between them. Grief softened into tenderness. Distance faded into shared silence. There were nights Jack would lie awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, haunted by memories of all that might have been: first steps, birthdays, scraped knees, bedtime kisses he'd missed. Sometimes he cried quietly, the tears catching him off guard. A man who had once been named one of America's most unshakable CEOs was now undone by a child's drawing of a stick-figure family that only recently included him. But Jack didn't run from that pain. He let it reshape him. He discovered joy in the mundane: burnt pancakes on Sunday mornings, water balloon fights that drenched his $1,000 loafers, answering questions like "why is the sky blue?" with far more sincerity than he'd ever used in a boardroom. And slowly, Noah responded. A small hand reaching for his. A hesitant dad whispered at bedtime. A drawing placed quietly on his desk at home, Jack, Emily, and Noah standing together under a paper sun. And Jack began to believe, despite everything, that maybe he wasn't too late. He wasn't perfect. He stumbled often. But for once in his life, Jack wasn't trying to be perfect. He was trying to be present. To be someone his son could count on. To be the man Emily had once believed he could become. And in doing so, Jack Thompson, the billionaire, the empire builder, became something far greater, a father. A protector. A man who finally understood what it meant to love without conditions, to stay even when it hurt, and to rebuild not just a life, but a family. As days bled into weeks, Jack and Noah watched in quiet desperation as Emily's memories seemed to unravel, thread by thread. At first, the lapses were subtle. A missed detail here, a forgotten name there. It was easy to dismiss, just a small slip. But soon, it became undeniable. Emily was no longer the woman Jack remembered. The once vibrant, sharp-minded woman he had loved had become a shadow, her memories slipping through her fingers like water. The first time it hit him full force was when Emily sat in the living room, staring at a photograph of Noah as a baby. Her face twisted in confusion as she whispered, "Is this our son?" Jack froze, his heart skipping a beat. It's Noah. Our son." But she just blinked, her eyes glazing over as though she hadn't recognized the boy in the photo. Her voice was softer now, almost a whisper. "He looks familiar, but I don't remember the day we took this." Jack's throat tightened with a mixture of fear and helplessness. The photos, the memories, they were meant to keep her anchored to them. But Emily was slipping, her grip on the past becoming weaker, more fragile by the day. A few nights later, after a particularly grueling round of chemotherapy, Emily lay in bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. The soft glow of the bedside lamp cast shadows over her face, making her look younger, as though the weight of years had fallen away. When Jack entered the room with Noah, holding the boy's small hand in his, Emily's eyes flickered, but there was no recognition. Her gaze moved from Noah to Jack, lingering for a moment before she spoke in a calm, distant tone, "Are you a friend of my husband?" The words stung like a slap, though Emily's voice was quiet, tinged with confusion rather than malice. Jack couldn't hold back the tear that escaped, quickly brushing it away before Emily could see. It's me," he said gently, sitting beside her on the bed. "It's Jack. Your husband. We've been through so much together." Her eyes searched his face, as though she was trying to find some trace of the man she once knew, but all she could muster was a confused frown. "Jack," she repeated the name, tasting it on her lips, but it didn't sound like it meant anything to her. It was just another word, detached from any sense of history. The realization that the woman he had once known so intimately, shared every secret and every dream with, was now a stranger, left a hollow ache in Jack's chest. He wanted to cry out in frustration, to demand that the Emily he knew return, but instead, he pressed his hand to her cheek, soft and reassuring. "I'm here, he whispered. "I'm here, and I won't leave you." But even as the words left his mouth, he knew he was lying. In some ways, Emily was already gone. Despite the pain that churned inside him, Jack refused to give up. The doctors had said there was no guarantee of recovery. Emily's memory loss was not something they could simply fix with a treatment or a miracle. But Jack couldn't accept that. He couldn't accept that his son would grow up without the mother who had always been his anchor, the woman who had held him in her arms and whispered stories of a future full of hope. One evening, he decided to take Emily back to the cabin by the lake, a place filled with memories of simpler times. He thought maybe, just maybe, the familiarity of the surroundings would help spark something within her, something deeper than the confusion that clouded her mind. They drove there in silence, the weight of the air between them heavy with unspoken fears. Emily looked out the window, her face unreadable. When they arrived, Jack helped her out of the car and led her slowly toward the cabin. Her steps were hesitant, uncertain, as though the place itself was unfamiliar. She paused by the porch, running her fingers along the railing where they had once sat together, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The memory of their past seemed to flicker in her eyes for a moment, and she stopped, her fingers tracing the worn wood. I think I remember this, Emily said quietly, almost to herself. Jack's heart leaped, and he leaned in, his voice almost pleading. Do you remember? The nights we spent here, the talks we had on this porch? This was our place. Emily tilted her head, her brow furrowing as if trying to recall something that was just out of reach. She nodded slowly, her voice shaky. It feels like I should know it, but the more I try, the further it slips away. Tears welled in Jack's eyes, but he held them back. Instead, he reached for her hand, his grip tight. We'll make new memories, Em. Even if the old ones fade, we'll create new ones. Together. Noah, who had been standing quietly by the door, walked over and gently placed his small hand on Emily's arm. Mommy, I love you, he said, his voice so full of innocence and hope. I know you love me, too, even if you don't always remember. Emily looked down at her son, her eyes softening as she reached out to touch his cheek. I do, Noah, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I love you more than anything. Though Jack could see the uncertainty in Emily's eyes, he also saw the flicker of recognition, the faintest spark of the woman she had once been. It wasn't much, but in that moment, it was enough. As they sat together on the porch that evening, the fading sun casting a warm glow over the lake, Jack felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe they couldn't undo the damage that had been done, but they could build something new, a bond that wasn't defined by memories alone, but by the love they still shared, however fragile it might be. Jack held Emily's hand tightly in his, and Noah leaned his head on her shoulder. They were broken, yes, but they were together, and for now, that was enough. As Jack embarks on this emotional journey, he realizes that the true measure of success isn't found in business deals or power, but in the relationships he's been neglecting for years. Through the pain of loss, the uncertainty of Emily's illness, and the trials of fatherhood, Jack learns that healing doesn't come from the past but from the willingness to face it and change. His journey is a testament to the resilience of the human heart, the strength of family, and the power of second chances. In the end, Jack discovers that the greatest treasure in life isn't something that can be bought, it's love, connection, and the courage to make things right.